I stood in the freezing shadows of the parking lot, watching the conservatory glow like a massive snow globe. Inside, they were laughing at the night's best joke me. I had overheard their rehearsal, the detailed plan to humiliate me before the city's elite, so I did not walk in to be torn apart. Instead, I sent a gift. At exactly 8:47 in the evening, my mother opened the lid, and the entire party went dead silent. My name is Nora Ward, and tonight, I was the ghost at my own funeral. I sat in the driver's seat of my Ford pickup, the engine cut to silence, parked in the darkest corner of the lot overlooking the Hawthorne Conservatory. From here, the venue looked less like a building and more like a glowing, crystal organ pulsing against the black winter sky. It was a massive structure of iron and glass, filled with warmth, expensive perfumes, and the kind of golden light that made everyone look 10 years younger and $1 million richer. My breath fogged the windshield, a small cloud of white against the view of the valet stand. I watched as the cars pulled up, Bentleys, Mercedes, the occasional vintage Rolls-Royce that was brought out only for nights like this. I watched men in bespoke tuxedos and women shivering in silk gowns step out, handing their keys to the valet boys in red vests. I knew most of them. I knew their names, their net worths, and the secrets they thought were buried deep in their wine cellars. But tonight, they were just an audience. They were the unsuspecting witnesses to a demolition that was scheduled to begin in exactly 6 minutes. My phone vibrated against the denim of my jeans. The screen lit up the dark cab with a harsh blue glow. It was a single text message from a number I did not save in my contacts. "The package is on the table, waiting for your signal." I did not reply. I just stared at the words, my thumbs hovering over the glass screen. Before setting the phone face down on the passenger seat, I gripped the steering wheel, squeezing the leather until my knuckles turned white. Grounding myself in the physical reality of the cold plastic and the smell of old coffee and sawdust that lingered in my truck. This was the Ward Winter Gala. It was the crown jewel of the social season in our corner of the state, an event designed meticulously by my mother, Celeste, and my father, Graham, to remind the world that the Ward family was still powerful, still relevant, and still wealthy. Of course, the reality was a little more complicated, but in our circle, perception was the only currency that mattered. The gala was where deals were struck, where alliances were forged over crystal flutes of champagne, and where the family image was polished until it blinded anyone who looked too closely. Every year, they had a theme. Every year, they had a centerpiece. And this year, for the first time in a decade, they had invited me, not just as a guest, but as a feature, or so they had let me believe. My mind drifted back, rewinding the clock 12 hours to the morning sun hitting the frost on the pavement. I had been at the service entrance of this very building, my hands gloved, unloading a crate from the back of this same truck. 12 hours ago, I was still stupid enough to have hope. I remembered the weight of the box in my arms. Inside was a custom architectural ornament, a sprawling, delicate structure of blown glass and twisted copper that I had designed myself. My company, Evergrove Atelier, had been commissioned to create it. My mother had called me a month ago, her voice dripping with a sweetness that should have tasted like saccharin, but to a starving daughter, it tasted like honey. She had said they wanted to showcase my talent. She had said it was time the world saw what I had built. She had said they were proud. I had walked through the service corridors of the Hawthorne Conservatory that morning, dodging caterers carrying trays of silver and florists hauling buckets of winter hydrangeas. I kept my head down. I told myself the mantra I had been repeating for years. I am just here to deliver. I am a vendor. I am not looking for love. I am not begging for a seat at the table. But the heart is a traitorous thing. Somewhere, beneath the layers of callous I had built up over years of snide comments and exclusion, a tiny, pathetic part of me had thought, maybe this time is real. Maybe they actually want me there. I had reached the double doors of the grand ballroom, ready to install the piece on the main dais. The room was empty of guests, but the stage was set, the microphones were live, the projector screen was lowered, and that was when I heard them. I had stopped just outside the doors, my boots silent on the plush carpet. My mother's voice carried clearly through the empty acoustic space. It was her rehearsal voice, sharp, projecting, and utterly devoid of warmth. "Graham, the lighting needs to be lower when we bring it up," she was saying. "We need the contrast. The slide needs to pop." "I know. Celeste," my father's voice rumbled, impatient. "I just want to make sure the timing works with the speech. Where is Blake?" "I'm here," my brother's voice chimed in. Smooth, arrogant, the golden boy who could do no wrong even as he burned through trust funds. "I was just thinking, Dad, on the transition, should I pause for laughter? Or just power through?" "Pause," my father said. "Let it sink in. We want them to understand the difference. We need to show the donors that the Ward legacy is in the right hands, that we pruned the dead branches." I had frozen, the box heavy in my arms. Dead branches. "And Nora?" Celeste asked. "Did she confirm the delivery?" "She'll be here," Blake laughed. It was a cruel, wet sound. "She wouldn't miss a chance to feel important. She actually thinks this is a reconciliation. Mom, it's pathetic." "Well," Celeste sighed, the sound of someone dealing with a tedious chore. "If she comes tonight, make sure she stands in the right spot. I want the spotlight to hit her face when you read the caption. We need the room to see the disappointment in the flesh. It sells the narrative. Graham. The tragedy of wasted potential versus the triumph of tradition. It makes you look like a saint for tolerating her." "It's a good angle," my father agreed, sounding clinical. "We use her failure to highlight Blake's success. It shows we have standards. It shows the investors we know how to cut losses, even when it's family. Just make sure she doesn't cry on the carpet," Blake added. "Saltwater-stained silk," they laughed. All three of them, a harmonious chord of shared malice echoing in the cavernous, empty ballroom. I stood there in the hallway, 12 hours ago, and I felt something inside me snap. It wasn't a loud crack. It was a silent, clean break. The hope that I had been nursing, the little flame I had kept alive despite everything, simply went out. It was replaced instantly by a cold, hard clarity. I didn't storm in. I didn't throw the box. I didn't scream. I simply turned around, walked back to the service elevator, and placed the box exactly where the logistics manager had asked for it. I did my job. I finished the installation. I checked the wiring. I polished the glass. I made sure it was perfect, because I am a professional. And because I knew that if the trap was going to work, the bait had to be beautiful. Now, back in the darkness of the parking lot, I checked the dashboard clock. It was 8:41 in the evening. Inside that glowing building, the servers were currently pouring the toast champagne. My father would be stepping up to the microphone, adjusting his cufflinks, flashing that charismatic smile that had charmed bankers and senators for 40 years. My mother would be smoothing the skirt of her Dior gown, looking adoringly at my brother. Blake, they were preparing for the climax of their evening. They were preparing to put my picture on that massive screen, probably a photo of me in my work clothes, dirty and tired, and contrast it with Blake in a suit, framing me as the cautionary tale to his success story. They wanted a show. They wanted to publicly humiliate me to elevate themselves. They wanted to prove to their nervous investors that the Ward family knew how to separate the wheat from the chaff. I looked at the conservatory one last time. From this distance, the people inside looked like ants trapped in amber. They had no idea that the ground beneath them had already shifted. They had no idea that the dead branch had deep, strong roots that had been growing in the dark for a long time. I picked up my phone again. I looked at the text message, waiting for signal. My hand did not shake. My heart rate did not spike. I felt a strange, icy calm. The kind of calm that comes when you finally stop trying to swim upstream and decide to just blow up the dam instead. I typed a single word. Now. I hit send. I watched the screen indicate the message was delivered. Inside the hall, the timeline was set. At 8:47, My mother would gesture to the large, ribbon-wrapped box that had been delivered anonymously just moments ago. She would think it was a surprise gift from a wealthy admirer or a repentant daughter trying to buy back into the fold. She would open it in front of 300 of the city's most influential people. I leaned back against the headrest, the leather cold against my neck. I closed my eyes for a second, listening to the silence of the car, contrasting it with the noise that was about to erupt inside. Every year, on Christmas, I received a gift from them. Usually, it was something passive-aggressive, a book on etiquette, a gym membership, a check for a humiliatingly small amount of money with a note about learning to budget. They used gifts as weapons, little reminders of my inadequacy. I opened my eyes and stared at the glowing building. Every year I receive a gift, I whispered to the empty cab, my voice raspy but steady. This year I sent one. I reached for the thermos of coffee on the passenger seat, unscrewed the cap, and took a slow sip. It was lukewarm, but it tasted better than the finest champagne they were pouring inside. I wasn't going anywhere. I was going to sit right here. I wanted to watch the lights change. I wanted to see the moment the music died. The ringtone of my phone cut through the mechanical hum of Evergrove Atelier like a drill. It was not the standard chime I used for clients or vendors. It was a specific, jarring alert I had assigned to only one person. I was standing at the main workbench, a soldering iron in my right hand, finishing the delicate joint of a brass frame. Around me, my team was in the middle of the controlled chaos that defined our December. We were not just a flower shop, we were a production house. We designed landscapes, installed commercial holiday displays, and engineered experiences. The air smelled of fresh pine, metallic solder, and the sharp tang of industrial adhesive. We had 3 trucks loading out at the bay, and our revenue for this quarter alone was pushing 6 figures. But when I saw the name Celeste flash on the screen, I felt that familiar, childish shrink in my stomach. I set the iron down, took a breath that tasted of ozone, and slid my thumb across the glass. "Nora," my mother's voice came through, devoid of greeting or warmth. It was a tone of pure expectation. "Tell me the centerpiece is in transit. The donor reception starts in 4 hours, and the florist sent the wrong shade of white for the table runners. I cannot deal with another incompetence today." I motioned to Jenna, my operations manager, to check the manifest for the Hawthorne delivery. "Hello to you too." "Mother?" "Yes, the piece is finished. I am doing the final quality check now. It will be there within the hour." "Good," she snapped. Then came the pause, the hesitation that always preceded a condition. "Listen to me clearly. Do not, I repeat, do not bring it through the main lobby. The press is already setting up for the red carpet photos. And the last thing I need is you hauling a crate through the shot while the senator is arriving. Use the service bay on the north side, the one by the dumpster." "The loading dock," I corrected her, keeping my voice flat. "It is called a loading dock. Mother?" "Whatever you call it, just use it," she said, her voice tightening. "And Nora, please try to look presentable. If you run into anyone important in the hallways, I do not want them thinking we hired some street labor. Wear something neutral, invisible." "I am wearing my work uniform," I said, looking down at my slate-gray coveralls with the embroidered Evergrove logo. It was clean, professional, and practical. "Because I am working. Just get it there, and do not make a mess." The line went dead. No goodbye, no thank you, just the click of disconnection. I stared at the phone for a long moment. Jenna was watching me, her eyes filled with that sympathetic rage she always tried to hide. "Let me guess," Jenna said, leaning against a stack of crates. "She wants the prestige of your work, but does not want the reality of your presence." "She wants the centerpiece," I said, pocketing the phone. "And she wants me to be a ghost." I walked over to the object in question. It was magnificent. My mother had requested something transcendent, and despite my better judgment, I had given it to her. It was a geometric sphere, 3 feet in diameter, constructed from hand-brushed copper and shards of antique mirrored glass I had sourced from a demolition site in Europe. Inside, I had rigged a remote-controlled lighting core that pulsed softly, mimicking the slow beat of a heart. It was worth $15,000 on the open market. I was giving it to the Ward family for free. "Why do you do it, boss?" Cal, my head foreman, asked as he helped me lift the crate onto the dolly. He was a man of few words, 60 years old with hands like leather. "They don't pay the invoices on time. They talk down to you. You don't need their exposure. We are booked solid until February." "Because it is easier than the alternative," I said, securing the straps. "If I say no, I am the ungrateful daughter ruining Christmas. If I say yes, I buy myself 6 months of silence. It is a transaction. Cal, just a business transaction." But it was a lie. I knew it, and Cal knew it. I did it because I was desperate for them to look at something I made and see value. I wanted Graham Ward to look at this intricate, beautiful thing and realize his daughter was not a failure just because she worked with her hands. I drove the delivery van myself. The roads were slick with black ice, the city gray and biting under the winter sky. Hawthorne Conservatory was only 20 minutes away, a glass palace perched on a hill overlooking the river. As I approached, I saw the valet stand already set up, the red carpet rolled out like a tongue waiting to taste the shoes of the wealthy. I turned the wheel hard, steering the van away from the grandeur and down the narrow, potholed alley that led to the service entrance. The back of the house was a different world. It was where the dumpsters overflowed with expensive waste, where the kitchen staff smoked huddled against the brick wall, and where the illusion of magic was stripped bare. I backed the van up to the bay. A security guard I did not recognize stepped out of the booth, a clipboard in his hand. He looked at my van, then at me, with tired, indifferent eyes. "Delivery," he grunted. "Evergrove Atelier," I said, stepping out into the biting wind. "Drop off for the Ward Gala." He flipped through his pages, licking his thumb. "Don't see you? You got a vendor pass?" "I am Nora Ward," I said, the name tasting like ash in my mouth. "My parents are organizing the event." He looked up, scanning my face, then my coveralls, then the van. He let out a short, dismissive snort. "Right. And I am the King of England. Look, lady, I don't care who you are. If you aren't on the list, you wait. I got the caterers coming in 5 minutes." "Call the event planner," I said, my patience fraying. "Or call Celeste Ward directly. But if this centerpiece isn't on the dais in 10 minutes, you are going to be the one explaining why the main attraction is missing." He glared at me, but he picked up his radio. 2 minutes later, the heavy steel doors rolled up. No apology. He just waved me in. I pushed the dolly through the labyrinth of corridors. The air here smelled of dish soap and steamed vegetables. I navigated through the bustling kitchen, dodging sous chefs' screaming orders, and finally pushed through the swing doors into the grand ballroom. The transition was jarring. The noise of the kitchen vanished, replaced by the hollow, echoing silence of the massive hall. The room was freezing. They were keeping the temperature down to preserve the flowers until the guests arrived. And there they were. My father, Graham Ward, stood near the stage, inspecting the podium. He was wearing a cashmere sweater and slacks, looking every inch the patrician statesman. My brother, Blake, was lounging on a chair nearby, scrolling through his phone, looking bored. I pushed the dolly forward, the wheels squeaking slightly on the polished floor. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Graham turned, his eyes swept over me, but they didn't stop. They didn't register daughter, they registered vendor. His gaze landed immediately on the crate. "Is that it?" he asked. "Not hello, Nora. Not how are you, Nora. Just, is that it?" "It is the Winter Star," I said, stopping the dolly at the foot of the stairs. "Where do you want it?" He pointed a manicured finger at the central pedestal. "Up there, center, and be careful with the wiring. We have the projector screen coming down behind it later." He turned back to his papers. I felt a sting behind my eyes, hot and sudden. I swallowed it down. I unlocked the crate and began the process of unpacking. It was heavy, awkward work. I had to lift the 30-pound structure carefully, ensuring the glass shards didn't catch on the fabric lining. "Need a hand." The voice came from Blake. I looked up. He hadn't moved from his chair. He was grinning. That lopsided, shark-like grin that had gotten him out of 3 DUIs and a failed semester at business school. "I have got it," I said, grunting slightly as I hoisted the sphere onto the pedestal. Blake stood up and sauntered over, hands in his pockets. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my first car. He circled the pedestal as I adjusted the angle of the copper rays. "It is shiny," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "Very arts and crafts. Did you make this yourself? Or did you have your little elves do it?" "It is a custom design." "Blake," I said, focusing on the hidden switch at the base. "It took 200 hours of labor." 200 hours, he whistled, mocking me. "Wow. Imagine if you put that much effort into a real job. You know, Dad was saying just yesterday how quaint it is that you still like to get your hands dirty. He said it's a phase, like when I went through that DJ phase in college, except you are 32. I run a company, Blake," I said, my voice low. "We employ 15 people. We are profitable." "Profitable," he laughed. "Selling glinty trash to bored housewives." "Sure, Nora, whatever helps you sleep." He leaned in closer, his cologne overpowering the scent of the lilies nearby. "Just do me a favor. When you are done playing with your glue and glitter, try to sneak out quietly. We have actual investors coming tonight. Serious people. We don't want them thinking the wards can't afford proper staff." I froze. My hand was on the final locking mechanism of the centerpiece. I could feel the cold metal against my palm. The urge to swing the object, to shatter the glass right into his perfect, sneering face, was a physical pulse in my veins. But I didn't. I thought of the mortgage I paid on my own. I thought of the team back at the shop who respected me. I thought of the fact that I owed these people nothing but the courtesy of a contract fulfilled. "It is set," I said, stepping back. I didn't look at Blake. I looked at the centerpiece. It was beautiful. It caught the ambient light and fractured it into 1,000 rainbows. It was too good for them. "Great," Blake said, waving a hand dismissively. "Now run along. Doors that way." I turned to my father. "Graham," I said. I had stopped calling him Dad years ago in professional settings. "The invoice was sent to your assistant last week, for the installation fee." Graham looked up, annoyed. "We will handle it in the next billing cycle. Nora, don't badger me about pennies when I'm trying to organize $1 million gala." "It has been 90 days since the last event," I said calmly. "But fine, enjoy the night." "Nora," he called out as I turned to leave. I stopped. A foolish flicker of hope sparked again. Maybe he would say thank you. Maybe he would say, "It looked beautiful." "Tell the kitchen staff to speed up the prep on the way out," he said, not even looking at me. "I smell onions. I don't want the guests smelling onions." I stood there for 1 second, 2 seconds. I looked at the back of his head. I looked at Blake, who was already back on his phone. "I will pass the message," I said. I walked back toward the service doors. My boots felt heavy. My chest felt hollow. I had come here hoping for a crumb, and they had handed me a shovel and told me to dig my own hole. As I pushed through the swing doors, leaving the golden light of the ballroom for the fluorescent harshness of the kitchen. I pulled my phone out. I checked the time. It was early afternoon. They thought I was just the help. They thought I was a harmless, desperate thing that would keep coming back for more punishment no matter how hard they kicked. I walked past the security guard at the loading dock without a word. I got into my van. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the gray brick wall in front of me. "Not this time," I said to the empty cab. I put the van in gear and drove away. I didn't go back to the shop. I went home to change. I had a gift to wrap, and I needed to make sure the ribbon was tied tight enough to choke the life out of this entire evening. I had my hand on the cold metal handle of the van door. I had walked away. I had swallowed the insults, the dismissal, and the smell of onions in the hallway. I was ready to leave, but I am, first and foremost, a craftsman. And the curse of a craftsman is that you cannot walk away from imperfect work, even if the client is the devil himself. As I stood there in the biting wind of the loading dock, a nagging thought scratched at the back of my mind: the refraction angle on the winter star. When I had set it down, the overhead spot was hitting the secondary mirror. Not the primary copper vein. It meant the light would scatter to the floor instead of casting the starburst pattern on the ceiling. It was a small detail, maybe 5 degrees of rotation. To anyone else, it would be invisible. To me, it was the difference between art and decoration. "Damn it," I whispered, the vapor of my breath vanishing into the gray air. I couldn't leave it like that. If they were going to mock me, let them mock perfection. I wouldn't give Blake the satisfaction of pointing out a flaw, no matter how microscopic. I turned around. The security guard was busy arguing with a catering truck driver about a blocked lane. He didn't see me slip back through the heavy steel doors. The corridor was quieter now. The kitchen was in a lull between prep and service. I moved silently, my rubber-soled work boots making no sound on the linoleum. I reached the swing doors to the grand ballroom and pushed one open just a crack, slipping through like a shadow. The ballroom was different now. The house lights had been killed completely. The vast space was swallowed in a cavernous gloom, illuminated only by the faint, ambient glow of the exit signs and a single, sharp beam of blue light cutting through the darkness from the tech booth on the mezzanine level. The silence was thick, heavy, the kind of silence that amplifies every small sound. I could hear the hum of the HVAC system high above in the rafters. I could hear the static hiss of the PA system being engaged. I crept toward the dais. My centerpiece sat there, a dark silhouette against the gloom. I reached it and knelt down, my hands moving instinctively to the base to adjust the rotational axis. Click, a sound echoed from above, the sharp, amplified click of a microphone being tapped. Check, 1, 2, check. It was a technician's voice. Then, a shuffling sound. "Is the HDMI link stable? We don't want any lag on the transition." That was my father's voice, Graham. He wasn't on the floor anymore. He was up in the control booth, overseeing the final run-through. I froze. I was hidden behind the bulk of the podium and the large floral arrangements flanking the stage. In the dark, dressed in my charcoal coveralls, I was invisible. "It is stable, Mr. Ward," the tech replied. "We have the cue points set." "Good." My mother's voice joined them. It was sharp, clear, cutting through the speakers with terrifying fidelity. "Let's run the sequence. I want to see how the photos look on the big screen. The resolution needs to be crisp." I stayed crouched, my hands still resting on the cool copper of my creation. I should have stood up. I should have announced myself. "I'm just fixing the light." But something in the tone of her voice, a conspiratorial excitement, kept me pinned to the floor. "Cue slide 1, Graham ordered. Above me, the massive projector screen descended from the ceiling with a low mechanical whir. It unfurled like a white sail. A beam of light exploded from the booth, hitting the screen with blinding intensity. The image was massive. It was 20 feet high. It was a professional portrait of my brother, Blake. He was wearing a tuxedo, holding a crystal award, looking noble, visionary. The very image of the heir apparent. The text underneath, in elegant gold serif font, read, "Blake Ward, the future of tradition." "Excellent," Graham said, his voice booming through the empty hall. "Leave that up for 30 seconds. Let the applause die down naturally before you speak." "Celeste." "I will," she replied. "I will talk about his MBA, the merger he handled, and then we pivot. Pivot to the contrast," Blake's voice added. He was up there too. "Make sure the transition is jarring. No fade. Hard cut." "Ready for slide 2, the tech said. "Go," Graham commanded. The image of Blake vanished. The screen flickered, and then a new image appeared. My breath stopped in my throat. It was a photo of me, but it wasn't a portrait. It was a candid shot taken from a distance, likely with a telephoto lens. I remembered the day. It was 3 months ago. I was on a muddy job site, installing a root barrier for a difficult landscape project. It had been raining. My hair was plastered to my forehead. My face was streaked with mud, and I was bent over, hauling a heavy tarp, my mouth open in a shout of exertion to my crew. I looked feral. I looked exhausted. I looked dirty. And underneath the photo, the caption did not say Nora Ward, founder of Evergrove. It read, "Some branches grow too close to the dirt." A laugh erupted from the speakers. It was Blake. "God, look at that. It is perfect. She looks like a swamp creature." "It is effective," Graham mused, his voice critical, detached. "It illustrates the point visually. We are a family of refinement. We support high endeavors. Nora serves as the cautionary tale, the visual proof that we don't just hand out success, we demand standards." I knelt there on the stage, the light from the screen casting long, distorted shadows around me. My heart wasn't racing. That was the strange part. It had slowed down. It was beating with a heavy, thudding rhythm, like a funeral drum. "So here is the script," Celeste said. I could hear the rustle of paper near the microphone. "After the photo gets a reaction, and it will, Graham, trust me, the ladies will gasp. I will say, we love all our children, but we also recognize that not everyone is built for the weight of the Ward legacy. Some, like our dear Nora, find their happiness in simpler tasks." "Simpler tasks," Blake snorted. "That is generous." "Then," Celeste continued, "I will ask, is Nora here tonight, Nora? Darling, stand up." My hands, which had been resting on the copper sphere, clenched into fists. They were planning to call me out. They wanted me in the audience. They wanted the spotlight to swing around and find me, sitting there in my invisible dress, so everyone could compare the woman in the mud to the golden family on stage. "She will be mortified," Blake said, sounding delighted. "She will turn bright red. It is going to be hilarious." "It is necessary," Graham corrected. "It signals to the board that we have cut ties with the unpromising assets. It shows we are focused on strength. If she runs out crying, even better. It proves she is emotionally unstable. It justifies why she isn't on the trust anymore." "I have a line to add," Blake said. "After she sits down, or runs away, I want to take the mic and say, everyone needs to know their position. Some are at the head of the table, some are under it, cleaning up the crumbs." "Too aggressive?" Celeste asked. "No," Graham decided. "Strong, alpha. The investors like alpha." I felt a vibration against my hip, my phone. I carefully, slowly, pulled it out of my pocket. My thumb must have brushed the screen when I crouched down. Or maybe I had gripped it too tight. The screen was lit. The voice memo app was open. The red timer was ticking. 04:12. It had been recording. It had been recording since I walked back in. I looked at the waveform dancing on the screen. It spiked with every word my father spoke. It captured Blake's laugh. It caught the wet, sharp sound of my mother's cruelty. Cleaning up the crumbs. I didn't stop the recording. I let it run. For a moment, I thought I might vomit. The physical reaction to betrayal is visceral. It twists your gut. But then, the wave passed, and in its wake, it left something else. Something cold. Something hard. Something that felt like the diamond shards I had embedded in the centerpiece. I realized then that I wasn't their daughter. I wasn't their sister. I was a prop. I was a plot device in the movie of their lives. A character written solely to make the protagonist look better. They didn't hate me. Hate requires passion. This was worse. This was utility. They were using my humiliation as currency. I looked up at the giant screen, at the muddy, exhausted version of myself. That woman built a company. I thought, that woman employs 15 people. That woman pays her own bills. That woman is worth 10 of you. I looked at the winter star. The copper gleamed in the faint reflection of my own humiliation. They don't deserve this. I thought, it wasn't a question. It was a verdict. I reached for the power coupling at the base of the sphere. With a steady hand, I unlatched the safety clip. I pulled the master plug. The faint internal heartbeat of the light died instantly. Then, I reached for the locking clamps that secured the sculpture to the pedestal. Click, click, click. The sounds were soft, masked by the booming voices still coming from the speakers above. "Okay, kill the feed," Graham said. "Let's test the spotlight transition." The screen went black. The room plunged back into near-total darkness. This was my window. I didn't hesitate. I wrapped my arms around the winter star. It was heavy, 30 pounds of metal and glass, awkward and wide. But I had been hauling landscaping rocks and timber for 5 years. I was strong. Stronger than Blake, who had probably never lifted anything heavier than a golf club. I hoisted it off the pedestal. I cradled it against my chest, the cold copper pressing into my coveralls. I didn't look back at the booth. I didn't make a sound. I moved with the practiced stealth of someone who has spent a lifetime trying not to disturb the beautiful people. I walked backward, keeping the bulk of the podium between me and the mezzanine. I reached the edge of the stage. I stepped down, one stair at a time, feeling the weight in my lower back, balancing it. "Spotlight on table 4, the tech shouted. A beam of light slashed down, missing me by 3 feet. I kept moving, into the shadows of the wings, through the velvet curtains, out the side door. The moment the heavy door clicked shut behind me, the sound of the rehearsal was cut off. I was back in the silent, onion-scented corridor. My heart was finally pounding now, a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I adjusted my grip on the sphere. I walked fast. I passed a sous chef who was carrying a tray of garnishes. He looked at me, at the massive shiny object in my arms. "Wrong room," he asked, tiredly. "Defective unit," I said, my voice steady, professional. "Taking it back for repairs. Don't worry. The replacement is coming." He shrugged and kept walking. I didn't stop until I reached the loading dock. The wind hit me again, freezing the sweat on my neck. The van was there, my sanctuary. I opened the back doors and slid the winter star inside, securing it with the bungee cords I hadn't even put away yet. I threw a heavy moving blanket over it. Burying the copper and glass in darkness, I climbed into the driver's seat. I took the phone out of my pocket. Recording stopped. Saved as new recording 14. I pressed play. I skipped to the middle. Somewhere under it, cleaning up the crumbs, Blake's voice, clear as a bell. I sat there for a moment, staring at the brick wall. The sadness was gone. The hope was dead. In their place was a strategy. They wanted a show. They wanted to talk about standards. They wanted to talk about who pays the bills and who cleans the crumbs. "Okay," I whispered. "Let's talk." I started the engine. This time, I didn't just drive away. I drove with a destination. I had a lawyer to call. I had a file to open. And I had a gift to wrap. The winter star wasn't going to be on their table tonight, but something else would be. Something much, much brighter. The tires of my van crunched over the gravel of the Evergrove Atelier lot. It was a sound I usually associated with the end of a long shift, a sound that meant rest and satisfaction. Tonight, it sounded like the closing of a heavy book. I killed the engine and sat for a moment in the sudden silence. The shop was a converted warehouse in the industrial district, miles away from the manicured lawns and marble foyers of the Hawthorne Conservatory. Here, the streetlights flickered, the wind smelled of diesel and river mud, and the buildings were made of corrugated iron and honest brick. I looked up at the frosted windows of the main bay. The lights were still on. I had expected the shop to be dark. I had told everyone to go home at noon. It was Christmas Eve, after all. But there, silhouetted against the warm yellow glow of the interior, were 2 figures. I felt a lump rise in my throat, harder and more painful than the anger I had felt at the gala. I climbed out of the van. The cold air bit at my face, but as I slid the heavy side door of the warehouse open, a wave of warmth washed over me. It wasn't just the industrial heaters humming in the rafters, it was the smell. It smelled of sawdust, fresh pine resin, hot coffee, and that specific, sharp tang of spray adhesive. It smelled like home. Cal Hargrove was standing by the main workbench, his arms crossed over his chest. He was wearing his favorite flannel shirt, the one with the paint stains on the cuff, and a Santa hat that looked ridiculous on his grizzled, 60-year-old head. Next to him was Jenna Pike, my operations manager. She was leaning against a stack of birch logs, holding 2 mugs of something that steamed. They didn't say anything as I walked in. They just looked at me. They looked at the mud on my boots. They looked at the set of my jaw. Cal walked past me, straight to the back of the van. He saw the bungee cords. He saw the shape of the winter star covered by the moving blanket. He didn't ask why I had brought it back. He simply unhooked the straps, lifted the 30-pound sculpture with a grunt of exertion, and carried it to the quarantine table where we kept damaged goods. "I will check the wiring in the morning," Cal said, his voice rough like gravel. "Make sure the transport didn't rattle anything loose." He knew it wasn't broken. He knew I wouldn't have brought it back unless the job was dead. Jenna walked over and pressed one of the mugs into my hands. It was tea, strong and dark, spiked with a generous shot of something that smelled like whiskey. "Drink," she ordered. Her voice was soft, maternal, but with that steel core that made her a terrifying negotiator with flower vendors. "You look like you just walked out of a war zone." "I did," I said. I took a sip. The liquid burned pleasantly on its way down, thawing the ice that had settled in my chest. "But I think I might have been the casualty." I walked over to the old leather sofa we kept in the break area and sat down. The leather groaned under my weight. Cal and Jenna pulled up stools. They didn't push. They didn't pry. They just waited, offering the kind of patient silence that only people who truly know you can provide. "They did not want the centerpiece," I said finally, staring at the steam rising from my cup. "Their loss," Cal grunted. "Thing is a masterpiece." "No," I corrected him. "It wasn't about the art. It was about the artist." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I didn't want to recount it. I didn't want to say the words out loud and give them power again, so I just tapped the screen, set the volume to maximum, and placed it on the workbench between us. The recording began. My father's voice filled the high-ceilinged room, booming and authoritative, talking about dead branches. Then my mother's voice, sharp and cruel, planning the spotlight. And finally, Blake's laugh. That wet, entitled laugh. Everyone needs to know their position. Some are at the head of the table. Some are under it, cleaning up the crumbs. When the recording ended, the silence in the shop was deafening. Jenna's face had gone pale. She set her mug down slowly, as if she were afraid she might crush it. They were going to do that tonight in front of the mayor, in front of the press. "That is the plan," I said. 8:47, the toast. Cal stood up. He walked over to a scrap pile of lumber, picked up a 2x4, and snapped it in half over his knee with a crack that sounded like a gunshot. He threw the pieces into the waste bin. "They don't get to do that," Cal said, his voice shaking with a rage I had rarely seen. "They don't get to define you. I have watched you build this place from a garage unit. I have watched you sand floors until your hands bled. You have more dignity in your little finger than that entire family has in their bank vault." "Cal," I said gently. "No." He turned to me, pointing a finger. "You are not going to let them get away with this. Nora, you are too nice. You always take the high road. The high road is just a scenic route to getting walked over." "I am not taking the high road," I said. The heavy metal door of the front office opened then. A man stepped out. He was brushing lint off a pristine navy suit, looking entirely out of place amidst the power tools and sawdust. It was Grant Hollander. Grant was a commercial lawyer, a shark in a silk tie. But he was my shark. We had met 3 years ago when a corporate client tried to stiff me on a $50,000 installation fee. Grant had gotten me the money plus interest in 48 hours. Since then, he handled all of Evergrove's contracts. I had called him from the van 5 minutes after leaving the conservatory. "Grant," I said, standing up. "Thank you for coming on Christmas Eve. For double my hourly rate, I would come on the apocalypse," Grant said with a tight smile. He walked over to the workbench and looked at Cal and Jenna. He nodded to them respectfully. "The team." Grant heard the recording on the phone. I told them. "I did," Grant said. He placed a leather portfolio on the workbench, right next to a circular saw. "It is legally actionable as defamation. Potentially, But that takes years and costs a fortune. And frankly, it doesn't stop the immediate event. We don't want a lawsuit, I said. We want an eviction. Jenna looked at me, confused. Eviction, Nora. They rented the Hawthorne Conservatory. It is the most exclusive venue in the city. You can't evict them. You are just the decorator. I looked at my work family. I had never told them this part. Not because I didn't trust them, but because I didn't want it to be a thing. I didn't want to be the secretly rich girl. I wanted to be Nora who worked for everything. 8 months ago, I started, looking at Jenna. Do you remember when the previous ownership group of the Hawthorne Conservatory went bankrupt? It was in the papers. They over-leveraged on the renovation. Yeah, Cal said. They were going to turn it into condos. I bought the debt, I said quietly. Jenna's eyes went wide. You what? I formed an LLC called Ironwood Holdings. I explained. I used the profits from the last 3 holiday seasons and a line of credit I secured against the warehouse. I bought the controlling interest in the venue's debt and the master lease. I wanted to secure it because, well, I thought eventually we could expand Evergrove into event management. I kept the existing management team in place to run the day-to-day operations. I told them I wanted to remain a silent partner, completely silent. So, Grant interjected, opening his folder. Technically speaking, Nora owns the building they are standing in right now. Does your family know? Cal asked, a slow grin spreading across his face. No, I said. They don't read the fine print. They just sign the contracts with the management. They think Ironwood Holdings is some faceless conglomerate in Delaware. And here is the beautiful part, Grant said, tapping a document on the table. The Ward family is broke, or at least, cash poor. They are currently in arrears on the rental fee for tonight. They paid the deposit, but the balance $25,000 was due 48 hours prior to the event. They haven't paid. They also owe for the catering service from the last gala, which creates a cumulative breach of contract. They usually pay late, I said. They rely on their name. They assume the venue will wait because it is an honor to host the Wards. Ironwood Holdings does not care about honor, Grant said, his eyes gleaming. The contract states clearly, failure to remit full payment 48 hours prior to the event's start time constitutes a material breach. Clause 14, Section B. The owner reserves the right to terminate services immediately. Jenna let out a breath. You can shut them down. I can turn off the lights, I said. I can lock the doors. I can have security escort them out. We could send an email, Grant suggested, playing devil's advocate. We could serve them with a notice tomorrow. Sue for the balance. I looked at the phone. I thought about the slideshow. I thought about the caption, some branches grow too close to the dirt. They wanted to use the technology of that room to destroy me. They wanted to use the microphone to broadcast my shame. They wanted to use the very building I owned to celebrate their exclusion of me. No email, I said. My voice was steady. And no text messages. I walked over to the Winter Star. I ran my hand over the cold glass. They want a show, I said. They spent weeks planning a moment that would stop the party. They want everyone to look at the stage at 8:47. I think we should give them exactly what they want. What do you have in mind? Cal asked. I am going to send a gift, I said. Grant, I need you to draft the termination notice, make it official, notarize it, put it in a sealed envelope. Done, Grant said, already reaching for his laptop. Jenna, I turned to her. I need the number for the head of security at Hawthorne, the guy who runs the night shift, not the front gate guy, the boss. I have it, Jenna said, pulling out her phone. Billings. We did a walkthrough with him last month. Good, I said. Tell him the owner is invoking Clause 14. Tell him that when he gets the signal, the party is over, no music, no bar, no arguments. And the signal? Cal asked. I looked at the empty crate that had held the Winter Star. It was a beautiful box, lined with velvet. We are going to fill that box, I said. We are going to put a digital frame in it. We are going to load the recording of their rehearsal onto it, And we are going to put the legal notice right on top. I looked at my watch. We have 3 hours, I said. Let's get to work. The atmosphere in the shop shifted instantly. The heaviness vanished, replaced by the electric, focused energy of a crew on a deadline. We weren't just building a prop anymore, we were building a guillotine. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one putting my head on the block. One question, Grant asked, pausing his typing. Who delivers it if you walk in there? They will make a scene before you even open the box. I am not going in, I said. I am going to be in the parking lot. I want to see them walk out. I looked at the dark windows, imagining the lights of the conservatory. I want them to open it themselves, I said. I want my mother to untie the bow. I want her to think she has won right up until the second the trap snaps shut. That is cold, Nora, Cal said. But he was smiling. It is winter, I replied. It is supposed to be cold. This was not a prank. A prank is impulsive. A prank is messy. What we were assembling on the workbench of Evergrove Atelier was not designed to embarrass. It was designed to excise. It was a surgical procedure disguised as a Christmas present. Grant Hollander worked with the precise, frantic energy of a man who usually charged $600 an hour, but was doing this for the sheer love of the game. The printer in the corner of the office was rhythmically spitting out pages, the sound a steady mechanical heartbeat underlying our conversation. We are not just claiming breach of contract, Grant said, sliding a fresh document across the scratched wooden surface of the bench. He didn't look up from his laptop. We are claiming immediate forfeiture of usage rights due to insolvency and bad faith. Here is the breakdown. They owe $12,000 in rental arrears from the spring equinox event. They owe $8,000 in unpaid catering invoices, which Ironwood Holdings absorbed when we bought the debt. And crucially, they failed to pay the $25,000 balance for tonight's venue fee by the 48-hour deadline. They usually pay the week after, I said. Reading the document, it was cold, clinical, and devastating. They think the rules are suggestions. Tonight, the rules are iron, Grant replied. He picked up a heavy cream-colored envelope. This is the notice of termination. It cites the specific clauses in their rental agreement. Once this is placed in Graham Ward's hand, or the hand of his authorized agent, the event is legally over. They are trespassing from that second forward. And the police? I asked. Private property, Grant said. Ironwood Holdings has the right to remove trespassers. If they refuse to leave, the police remove them. But we won't need the police. We have Billings. I looked at Jenna. She was on the phone with the head of security at the conservatory. She held a hand over the mouthpiece. Billings is in, she said, her eyes wide. He says Graham yelled at one of his guards earlier for not opening a door fast enough. He is more than happy to enforce the contract. He just needs the green light. Tell him the code is Silent Night, I said. When the package is delivered, he cuts the house audio. He brings up the house lights to full brightness, the ugly, fluorescent cleaning lights, not the warm mood lighting, and he shuts down the bar. No more champagne, no more ice. Jenna nodded and turned back to the phone to relay the orders. I turned my attention to the box. It was a beautiful thing, repurposed from a luxury gift set we had designed for a jewelry brand last year. It was 18 inches square, wrapped in deep, blood-red velvet that felt like moss under my fingertips. It screamed exclusivity. It screamed expensive apology. It was exactly the kind of object my mother, Celeste, would be unable to resist opening in front of an audience. She would see the velvet and assume I was begging for forgiveness with something shiny. I prepared the payload. First, the digital frame. It was a high-resolution slate, sleek and black. I had loaded the video file, the recording of their rehearsal, onto the internal drive. I set the interface to autoplay on wake. I taped a small photosensitive sensor to the bezel. As soon as the lid of the box was lifted and light hit the sensor, the frame would wake up. The volume was set to maximum. I placed the frame in the center of the box, nestled in black satin. Next, the legal paperwork. Grant had sealed the notice of termination in a thick linen envelope. On the front, in elegant calligraphy that matched the gala's invitations, he had written to the account holder. It looked like a gift card. It looked innocent. I placed the envelope directly on top of the digital frame. Finally, the card. I took a piece of heavy cardstock and a fountain pen. My hand was steady. I wrote 5 words. From Nora. For the family. I tucked the card into the ribbon on the outside of the box. "It is ready," I said. Stepping back, the warehouse door rolled up, letting in a gust of snowy wind. A man walked in. He didn't look like a delivery boy. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a sharp black suit and an earpiece. His name was Marcus, a professional process server Grant used for high-risk deliveries. He was the kind of man who could hand a subpoena to a mafia boss and walk away without a scratch. "Is this the package?" Marcus asked, his voice a deep baritone. "That is the package," I said. "And here is the secondary file." I handed him a manila folder containing the copies for the security team and the venue manager. "You give this to Billings at the service entrance. He will get you onto the floor." "And the target?" Marcus asked. "Graham Ward is the signatory," Grant answered. "But the box goes to Celeste Ward. She will want to open it. She likes the attention. Once she opens it, you hand the envelope to Graham. You state clearly, you have been served with a notice of immediate termination." "Understood," Marcus said. He picked up the velvet box with a gloved hand, treating it like it contained a bomb. In a way, it did. Timing. I looked at the clock on the wall. "The toast is scheduled for 8:45. You walk in at 8:46. You wait for the pause. You present the gift. They will think it is part of the show." "It will be," I said dryly. Marcus nodded and turned to leave. He vanished into the night. A dark angel of consequences. "One last thing," I said, turning back to Grant and Jenna. "The insurance policy." I walked over to the laptop. I had drafted an email earlier. The recipient list was short but lethal. It included the 3 biggest donors who were attending the gala tonight, the CEO of the regional bank, the head of the hospital board, and the local councilwoman. These were people who cared about their reputations more than anything else. They were people who would be terrified of being associated with a financial scandal or a fraud investigation. The subject line was simple: urgent legal risk assessment. Regarding Ward Winter Gala, the body of the email was brief. It stated that the event they were currently attending was being held in violation of a rental contract and that the organizers were in significant financial default. I attached the scanned copies of the unpaid invoices and the notice of termination. "If we send this," Grant warned, "you are burning the bridge to the ground. They will never eat lunch in this town again." "They were planning to put my face on a screen and laugh at me," I said. "They were planning to use my humiliation to secure funding from these exact people. I am just giving the investors full transparency." I looked at the screen. The mouse cursor hovered over the Schedule Send button. "Set it for 8:48, I said. 1 minute after the box opens, I want the phones in the room to start buzzing right when the music stops. I clicked the button. The command was locked in. "We are done here," I said. I grabbed my coat. "Grant, keep your phone on. If they call you, you tell them the eviction is non-negotiable." "Where are you going?" Jenna asked. "You're not going inside, are you?" "No," I said. "I am going back to the parking lot. I have a front row seat." I walked out of the shop, leaving the warmth and the smell of sawdust behind. The drive back to the Hawthorne Conservatory felt different this time. The first time, I had driven with hope. The second time, with anger. Now, I drove with a cold, quiet anticipation. I parked in the same spot, high on the ridge overlooking the venue. The lot was full now. Chauffeurs were idling in limousines, smoking cigarettes, waiting for the party to end at midnight. They had no idea the schedule had just been moved up. I killed the lights. I rolled down the window just an inch to let the cold air keep me sharp. Below me, the conservatory was a beacon of golden light. I could see silhouettes moving behind the frosted glass. I could imagine the clinking of glasses, the murmur of polite conversation. the smell of expensive perfume masking the rot. I checked my watch. 8:42. Inside, my mother was probably signaling the tech booth. My father was probably clearing his throat, preparing to deliver his speech about legacy and standards. Blake was probably smirking, waiting for his cue to kick his sister while she was down. I reached over to the passenger seat and picked up the thermos of coffee. I took a sip. "Showtime," I whispered. I watched the service entrance. At exactly 8:44, a black sedan pulled up. Marcus stepped out. He adjusted his jacket, picked up the red velvet box, and walked past the security checkpoint without breaking stride. Billings was there. I saw the brief nod. The door opened. The Trojan horse was inside the walls. I leaned back, my eyes fixed on the massive glass dome of the ballroom. In a few minutes, I wouldn't need to imagine what was happening. I would see the lights change. I waited for the world to stop turning for the Ward family. Inside the cab of my truck, the heater was humming a low, steady note, fighting a losing battle against the encroaching frost. I propped my tablet up against the steering wheel. The screen glowed with the high-definition live stream of the Ward Winter Gala. My parents, in their infinite vanity, always insisted on broadcasting the event. They claimed it was for the international donors who could not fly in, but really, it was just another mirror for them to preen in front of. Tonight, however, that mirror was going to show them something they were not expecting. From my vantage point on the hill, looking down at the physical building, the conservatory was just a glowing box, but on the screen in front of me, I had a front-row seat to the circus. The camera panned across the room. It was exactly as I remembered from previous years, a sea of black tuxedos and shimmering sequins, punctuated by the clinking of crystal and the low drone of polite, meaningless conversation. The tables were set with white linen so stark it looked like a sanitarium, but my eyes went immediately to the center of the room, to the main dais where my winter star was supposed to be. It was empty. Well, not entirely empty. In a desperate attempt to fill the void left by my defective creation, Celeste had evidently sent an assistant running to the nearest 24-hour store. Sitting on the pedestal, looking pathetically small under the $1 million lighting rig, was a trio of generic poinsettias wrapped in gold foil. They looked like something you would buy at a gas station on the way to a dinner party you forgot about. I watched my mother, Celeste, working the room, on screen. She looked frantic. Her smile was tight, stretched so thin it looked like it might snap the skin around her mouth. She was standing near the mayor, nodding enthusiastically at whatever he was saying, but her eyes kept darting back to that sad little arrangement on the stage. She knew it looked cheap. She knew it threw off the entire aesthetic. She was visibly vibrating with the need to control the narrative, to explain away the ugliness before anyone could judge her. My father, Graham, was no better. He was standing near the bar, swirling a glass of scotch that looked a little too dark to be his first. He wasn't mingling. He was hovering. He kept checking his watch, then looking at the entrance, then looking at the tech booth. He was trying to project the image of the relaxed patriarch, the lord of the manor. But his posture gave him away. He was stiff, his shoulders hunched up toward his ears. He looked like a man who knew he was walking a tightrope but hadn't looked down yet. And then there was Blake. My brother was the only one who looked like he was actually having fun. He was holding court at a table full of young trust fund inheritors, laughing loudly, gesturing with a champagne flute. When he realized I wasn't coming when the clock ticked past 8:30, and no apologetic daughter appeared to be scolded, he clearly decided to improvise. I could see him whispering to the tech crew, pointing at the screen, a malicious grin spreading across his face. He wasn't going to let my absence ruin his fun. If I wasn't there to be the target, he would just paint a target on my empty chair. The house lights dimmed. The conversation in the room died down, replaced by the polite rustle of fabric as 300 guests turned toward the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," Graham's voice boomed over the live stream audio. It was smooth, practiced, the voice of a man who believed his own press releases. "Welcome to the Ward Winter Gala. Tonight is about excellence. It is about the standards we hold ourselves to and the legacy we build for the future. I took a sip of my coffee. Here we go, I whispered. We have many things to celebrate tonight, Graham continued, stepping into the spotlight. He gestured to the screen behind him. We celebrate success. We celebrate those who have the strength to carry the torch. The first slide appeared. It was the portrait of Blake, looking presidential. The room applauded. It was polite applause, the kind you buy with expensive dinners. Blake walked onto the stage, waving like he had just won an election. He took the microphone from our father. "Thank you, Dad," Blake said. He didn't look humble. He looked hungry. "You know, we were hoping my sister, Nora, could join us tonight." He paused for effect. The camera cut to a wide shot of the crowd. I saw a few heads turn, looking for me. "But," Blake sighed, a theatrical, heavy sound. "Nora has other priorities. While we are here building the future, Nora prefers to play in the dirt." He clicked the clicker. The slide changed. There it was, the photo of me in the mud, hair wild, face streaked with grime, hauling a heavy tarp. It was projected 20 feet high. "We tried to get her to clean up," Blake chuckled into the mic. "But I guess you can take the girl out of the swamp. But you can't take the swamp out of the girl." I watched the audience. This was the moment they had rehearsed. This was the moment where everyone was supposed to laugh, where the room was supposed to bond over the shared superiority of the civilized people versus the laborer. But nobody laughed. The silence on the live stream was excruciating. It wasn't the silence of awe. It was the silence of confusion. These were wealthy people, yes. They were snobs, yes. But they were also people who understood public relations. They understood decorum. And what they were seeing wasn't a witty family anecdote. It was a public execution. I saw Mrs. Calloway, the head of the hospital charity board, put her wine glass down. She didn't look amused. She looked uncomfortable. She leaned over to her husband and whispered something. I couldn't hear it, but I could read her lips. Why are they doing this, Celeste? Sensing the room was not reacting correctly, grabbed the microphone. She tried to salvage it. "Oh, it is just a little family teasing," she said, her voice shrill, climbing an octave too high. "We love Nora. We really do. But we also believe in honesty. We believe that sometimes you have to acknowledge that not everyone in the family has the same altitude. Some people are just happier at the bottom of the hill." It was the wrong thing to say. It was deeply, profoundly tone-deaf. On the screen, I saw a man in the front row, Mr. Henderson, a major real estate developer, cross his arms. He looked at Graham, then at the screen, then back at Graham. His face was a mask of judgment. He wasn't judging me. He was judging them. He was wondering why a family that claimed to be so powerful felt the need to punch down at their own daughter on Christmas Eve. "It is about standards," Graham interjected, trying to force the point home, oblivious to the temperature in the room dropping. He thought the silence was respect. He thought they were listening to a sermon. "We show you this not to be cruel, but to show you that the Ward family knows the difference between gold and gravel. We curate our lives just as we curate our investments." "That is right," Blake added, grinning at the photo of me. "Nora is a great example of what happens when you don't listen to your parents. She is our little cautionary tale." A nervous titter ran through the back of the room. Probably the junior executives who felt obligated to laugh. But the heavy hitters, the people who actually wrote the checks, they were stone-faced. "This feels like a trial," I heard a voice on the audio feed. It was faint, probably picked up by a mic near a table. "Since when is a gala a roast?" Graham didn't hear it. He was too busy smiling at his own cleverness. He raised his glass. "So let's raise a toast," Graham said, his voice booming, "to those of us who made it to the top, and to those who are still digging holes." He laughed. Blake laughed. Celeste forced a laugh, looking around the room, begging with her eyes for everyone else to join in. It was the peak of their arrogance. They stood there, bathed in the spotlight, convinced they were the kings and queens of the world, convinced that by stepping on me, they were standing taller. They had no idea that they weren't standing on a pedestal, they were standing on a trapdoor. And that was when the side door of the ballroom opened. The camera angle shifted slightly, catching the movement. The room was still quiet. The awkward echo of Graham's toast hanging in the air. Heads turned. They were looking for a distraction, anything to break the tension of this bizarre family therapy session. Enter Marcus. He walked into the frame like he owned the place. He was dressed in a suit that fit better than Blake's. He moved with a purpose that cut through the stagnant atmosphere of the room. He wasn't a waiter. He wasn't a guest. He was an event. In his hands, he carried the red velvet box. It was large. It was luxurious. The spotlight that had been searching for a target swung over and hit him, illuminating the rich, blood-red fabric and the massive silk bow. Graham stopped laughing. He lowered his glass. "What is this?" he asked, his voice caught by the microphone. Celeste's eyes lit up. I saw the calculation happen in real time on her face. She saw the box. She saw the expensive wrapping. She saw the timing. Her ego immediately rewrote the script. She thought I had caved. She thought I had sent a peace offering. She thought this was the moment she won. "Oh," Celeste gasped, stepping forward, pushing Blake slightly out of the way. "It seems we have a late arrival." She looked at the crowd, her smile returning, this time with genuine triumph. "You see," she told the audience, her voice dripping with smug satisfaction. "Family is family. Even the ones who stumble eventually find their way back to pay their respects." I sat in my truck, watching the screen, my finger hovering over the send button for the email to the donors. "Open it, Mother," I said to the cold air. "Go ahead. Tell them it's from me." Marcus walked straight up the stairs to the dais. He didn't look at Graham. He didn't look at Blake. He stopped in front of Celeste and held out the box with both hands. The room held its breath. The awkwardness was gone, replaced by curiosity. Was this the reconciliation? Was this the happy ending to the uncomfortable drama they had just witnessed? Celeste reached out. Her manicured fingers touched the red velvet. She looked like a queen accepting tribute. "From Nora," she announced to the room, reading the card I had tucked into the ribbon. She beamed. "For the family." She pulled the ribbon. I watched the red silk fall away. I watched her lift the heavy lid. And for the last time that night, the Ward family smiled. Then, the sensor inside the box caught the light. The trap snapped shut. The moment hung in the air, suspended by the fragile thread of my mother's vanity. On the screen inside my truck, the scene was crystal clear. Celeste stood center stage, the red velvet box cradled in her arms like a royal infant. She was glowing. The harsh spotlight that had been used to mock me just moments ago was now, in her mind, illuminating her victory. She believed she had broken me. She believed that I had sent this gift as a capitulation, a public offering of submission to the Ward family hierarchy. The room was silent, but it was a warm, expectant silence. The guests were leaning in. They wanted the resolution. They wanted to see what the prodigal daughter had sent to apologize for being, as Blake had so eloquently put it, a swamp creature. Celeste reached for the card tucked into the silk ribbon. She pulled it free with a flourish. She brought it to the microphone, adjusting her reading glasses with a theatrical tap. "From Nora," she read aloud, her voice trembling with performative emotion. "For the family." A ripple of applause moved through the room. It was polite, rhythmic, the sound of 300 wealthy people agreeing that order had been restored. The mayor nodded approvingly. Mrs. Calloway smiled, looking relieved that the awkwardness was over. They clapped because they thought the script had been followed. They thought the rebellious element had been brought to heel. I took a sip of my coffee. It was cold now. "Wait for it," I whispered. Celeste beamed at the applause. She handed the card to Blake, who smirked and tucked it into his tuxedo pocket as if it were a trophy. Then, she turned her attention back to the box. She hooked her fingers under the lid. "Let us see what lovely thing she has created for us." Celeste cooed into the microphone. She lifted the lid. The motion was smooth. The heavy cardboard hinged back. The velvet lining was revealed. And instantly, the photosensitive sensor on the bezel of the digital frame detected the sudden flood of stage light. The screen inside the box flared to life. It was a high contrast, black and white interface, and then the audio kicked in. I had set the volume to the maximum decibel level the small device could handle, but in the acoustic perfection of the Hawthorne Conservatory ballroom, picked up by the live microphone Celeste was standing directly in front of. The sound didn't just play, it detonated. My father's voice, Graham Ward, boomed through the massive speaker array, louder and clearer than God himself. It is a good angle. We use her failure to highlight Blake's success. It shows we have standards. It shows the investors we know how to cut losses, even when it is family. Celeste froze. Her hand was still holding the lid open, paralyzed by the sudden assault of sound. She looked down at the box, her expression collapsing from triumph to sheer, unadulterated confusion. The room did not react instantly. The human brain takes a second to process context shifts. For 1 heartbeat, 2 heartbeats, the guests sat there, smiles frozen on their faces, trying to understand if this was part of the speech. Then the second clip played. Just make sure she doesn't cry on the carpet. Saltwater stains silk. That was Blake. His laugh followed, a sharp, cruel bark that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. On stage, the real Blake took a step back. His face went drained of color. He looked at the box, then at the speakers, then at the tech booth, his eyes wide and panicked. The audio continued, relentless, a ghost from 12 hours ago returning to haunt the present. Everyone needs to know their position. Some are at the head of the table, some are under it, cleaning up the crumbs. The silence that followed the last word was not the warm silence of before. It was a vacuum. It was the sound of 300 people simultaneously realizing they were witnessing a murder. But it wasn't a murder of a person. It was the murder of a reputation. I saw Mrs. Calloway's hand fly to her mouth. I saw the mayor slowly lower his champagne flute to the table, the glass making a sharp clink that seemed deafening in the quiet. The man next to him, the real estate developer who had looked annoyed earlier, was now staring at the stage with a look of absolute, icy disgust. Celeste dropped the lid. The box snapped shut. The audio cut off, but the echo remained. It hung in the air, heavier than the humidity. Cleaning up the crumbs, Celeste looked up. Her eyes were wild. She looked at the audience, her mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. She wanted to say it was a joke. She wanted to say it was a mistake. She wanted to say anything that would put the mask back on, but the mask lay in pieces on the floor. Celeste stammered, the microphone picking up the wet, terrified catch in her throat. I think there has been a technical malfunction. Marcus did not wait for her to recover. He had been standing respectfully to the side, blending into the background like a good servant. But the moment the lid dropped, his posture changed. He straightened his spine. He buttoned his jacket. He stepped into the center of the spotlight, not as a delivery boy, but as an officer of the court. He walked past Celeste. He didn't even look at her. She was no longer the power in the room. He walked straight to Graham Ward. My father was standing by the podium, gripping the wood so hard his knuckles were yellow. He was staring at the red box in Celeste's hands as if it were radioactive. When Marcus stopped in front of him, Graham looked up, dazed. Graham Ward, Marcus asked. His voice was not amplified, but in the dead silence of the ballroom, it carried to the back row. Graham nodded dumbly. Yes. Marcus reached into his inner breast jacket pocket. He pulled out the linen envelope with the wax seal. He held it out. I am serving you with a formal notice of breach of contract and immediate lease termination. Marcus said. His tone was flat, professional, devoid of any emotion. It was the voice of the law. This facility is now under the control of the creditor, Ironwood Holdings. You are in default of payment and violation of the conduct clause. Graham looked at the envelope. He didn't take it. He couldn't. His hands were shaking too badly. Marcus didn't blink. He simply placed the envelope on the podium, directly on top of Graham's speech notes. "You have 30 minutes to vacate the premises," Marcus stated. "This event is over." Graham found his voice. It was a weak, strangled thing. "This is preposterous. We have guests. You can't just—" "The termination is effective immediately," Marcus interrupted. He turned to the side, looking toward the main entrance. Security, it was the cue. At the back of the room, the double doors swung open, but it wasn't waiters bringing out the dessert. It was Billings. The head of security for Hawthorne Conservatory walked in, flanked by 4 of his largest officers. They were not wearing the ceremonial blazers they wore for galas. They were wearing their tactical vests. They walked with a heavy, rhythmic tread, moving past the stunned guests, heading straight for the stage manager and the bar staff. Billings looked up at the tech booth. He raised his hand and made a slashing motion across his throat. "Kill it." The effect was instantaneous and violent. The warm, golden mood lighting that bathed the room in elegance vanished. In its place, the housework lights slammed on. These were the lights used for cleaning and maintenance. They were harsh, white, fluorescent tubes that buzzed slightly. They washed out every color in the room. The diamonds stopped sparkling. The silk dresses looked gaudy. The makeup on the guests' faces looked caked and artificial. The room went from a palace to a gymnasium in the blink of an eye. Simultaneously, the background music, the soft string quartet track that had been looping, cut out with a static pop. The silence became absolute. Then, the sound of the bar closing began. It was a cacophony of finality. Bottles were being corked. Ice scoops were dropped into metal buckets. The metal shutters of the service bar slammed down with a rattle that sounded like a prison gate closing. "Ladies and gentlemen," Billings' voice boomed. He didn't need a microphone. He had the voice of a retired drill sergeant. "Please place your glasses on the tables. The venue is closing due to an administrative breach by the organizers. We ask that you make your way to the exits in an orderly fashion. Ballet is retrieving vehicles now." The reaction was not panic. It was shock. Pure, unadulterated shock. I watched on the screen as the guests looked at each other. They looked at the unfinished wine on the tables. They looked at the half-eaten appetizers. Then, slowly, they looked at the stage. They looked at the Ward family. Graham was staring at the envelope on the podium. Celeste was clutching the red box to her chest, looking like she was about to faint. Blake was standing with his mouth open, looking small and terrified under the harsh fluorescent glare. They looked exposed, without the lighting, without the music, without the veneer of money. They just looked like 3 people who had been caught trying to steal something they couldn't afford. "No," Celeste whispered. The microphone was still hot, but nobody was listening to the speakers anymore. "No, you cannot do this. It is Christmas." A woman at table 4, the wife of a senator, stood up. She picked up her clutch. She didn't look at the stage. She turned her back on them and started walking toward the door. That was the first domino. Within seconds, the scraping of chairs against the floor filled the room. It was a harsh, ugly sound. People were standing up, not to applaud, not to toast, to leave. I saw the mayor signal to his aides. They moved in, surrounding him, guiding him away from the incident as if the wards were contagious. I saw the investors checking their phones that I knew had just received an email from Ironwood Holdings with the subject line, "Urgent Risk Assessment." I sat in my truck, my hands gripping the steering wheel. I wasn't smiling. I wasn't laughing. I felt a strange, hollow sensation in my chest. It was the feeling of a weight being lifted, but it was a weight I had carried for so long that I almost missed the pressure. "Merry Christmas, Mother," I said to the screen, on the stage. Graham Ward finally picked up the envelope. He ripped it open. He read the first line. His face went from pale to a deep, mottled red. He looked up, scanning the room, his eyes wild. He wasn't looking for the police. He wasn't looking for the manager. He was looking for me. He knew, in that second, reading the legal jargon, seeing the precision of the strike, he knew exactly who was behind the curtain. He realized that the failure daughter, the one who played in the dirt, had just buried him in it. But I wasn't there. I was a ghost in the parking lot, and the show was over. The screen in the box, which Celeste was still holding, finally went dark, but the damage was permanent. The recording had done its work. The silence in the room was no longer about the audio. It was about the truth. The Ward family had tried to sell a lie, and the receipt had just been printed for everyone to see. I reached for the tablet and minimized the video feed. I didn't need to see the rest. I knew what happened when a party died. The guests would flee, the staff would clean up, and the hosts would be left standing in the wreckage of their own ego. I put the truck in gear. The engine rumbled to life. I had one more email to check, a confirmation from Grant that the second phase of the plan was ready, because the night wasn't over yet. The humiliation was public. Yes, but the lesson. The lesson was just beginning. As I watched the first group of guests spill out of the main doors of the conservatory, shivering in their thin coats, looking for their cars, I felt a calm settle over me. It was the calm of a job well done. It was the calm of a craftsman who had finally fixed the flaw in the design. I wasn't the flaw. I never was. I waited. I wanted to see Graham and Celeste walk out those doors. I wanted to see them stripped of their audience. I wanted to see them face the cold winter air without the shield of their wealth to keep them warm. And I would be waiting right here when they did. The harsh fluorescent work lights of the Hawthorne Conservatory did not just illuminate the room, they dissected it. Under that unforgiving white glare, the magic of the Ward Winter Gala didn't just fade, it evaporated. The expensive floral arrangements looked wilted. The ice sculptures, deprived of their blue mood lighting, just looked like wet, dripping blocks of frozen water, and my family, standing center stage, looked less like royalty and more like suspects in a lineup. I watched the screen in my truck, transfixed. The audio feed was still live, picking up the chaotic murmur of 300 confused guests, but the real drama was playing out in the body language of the three people on the dais. Graham Ward attempted to recover. It was a valiant, if delusional, effort. He forced a laugh, a dry, cracking sound that fooled absolutely no one. He waved a hand at Marcus, the process server, as if Marcus were a waiter who had brought the wrong wine. "Ladies and gentlemen," Graham announced, his voice booming because he had forgotten or simply didn't care that he was shouting into a dead room. "Please, stay seated. There has been a clerical error, a misunderstanding with the booking agency. We will have the lights back down and the music up in just a moment." He turned to Marcus, his smile dropping instantly into a snarl that the front row could definitely see. "Get off my stage," he hissed, though the microphone on the podium was still hot enough to catch the sibilance. "Take your little envelope and get out before I have you arrested for disruption." Marcus didn't budge. He looked like a statue carved from granite. "There is no error, Mr. Ward," Marcus said, his voice calm, carrying the weight of absolute legal certainty. "The paperwork is precise. You are $25,000 in arrears for tonight's venue fee. You have outstanding debts of $12,000 from the spring event, and your catering balance is $8,000 past due. Clause 14 is explicit. In the event of insolvency or material breach, the owner retains the right to immediate termination." Graham flinched as if he had been slapped. He looked at the papers Marcus had slammed onto the podium. He saw the numbers. He saw the dates. He saw the undeniable reality of his own financial mismanagement laid out in black ink. "That is a lie," Graham stammered, grabbing the papers. His hands were shaking so violently the pages rattled. "We sent the wire transfer. It must be a banking delay. You can't shut down a gala because of a banking delay." "The wire was never sent, Mr. Ward," Marcus replied. "We checked with the bank at 4 o'clock this afternoon. Insufficient funds." Insufficient funds. The phrase hung in the air, heavier than the earlier silence. In a room full of people whose self-worth was measured in liquidity, being accused of having insufficient funds was worse than being accused of murder. It was a social death sentence. That was when Blake snapped. My brother had been standing frozen, watching his inheritance crumble. But the phrase, insufficient funds, triggered something primal in his entitled brain. He couldn't handle the reality, so he decided to attack the messenger. You are lying, Blake screamed. He lunged forward. He didn't go for Marcus. He went for the red velvet box that Celeste was still clutching, as if destroying the source of the audio would somehow rewind time. Give me that. It is a fake. It is a setup. He grabbed the box from Celeste's hands and hurled it to the floor. It hit the hardwood stage with a sickening crack, the plastic frame shattering. Then he turned on Marcus, fists raised, his face twisted into an ugly mask of rage. Who paid you? Huh? Who put you up to this? He took a swing. It was a sloppy country club swing, telegraphed from a mile away. Marcus didn't even have to move. Before Blake's fist could connect, a heavy hand clamped down on his shoulder. Billings, the head of security, had stepped up from the shadows. Billings was 6'4" and built like a vending machine. He didn't strike Blake. He simply immobilized him. He spun Blake around and pinned his arms to his sides in a professional restraint hold. Let go of me, Blake shrieked, kicking his legs like a toddler. Do you know who I am? I am a ward. I know exactly who you are, son, Billings said, his voice deep and bored. You are a trespasser. Now, calm down or you leave in cuffs. Your choice. The sight of Blake Ward, the future of tradition, the golden boy being manhandled by security while screaming like a brat was the breaking point for the room. At table 1, directly in front of the stage, Mr. Henderson stood up. Henderson was the biggest commercial developer in the state. He was a man who prided himself on stability and reputation. He looked at Graham, who was frantically reading the eviction notice. He looked at Blake, who was currently trying to bite the security guard. He looked at Celeste, who was sobbing into her hands. Henderson didn't say a word. He simply buttoned his tuxedo jacket, turned to his wife, and offered her his arm. We are leaving, Henderson said. He didn't whisper. He said it with the clarity of a man closing a ledger. I do not do business with chaos. He walked toward the exit. It was the first stone in the landslide. Once Henderson moved, the fear of contamination spread like a virus. The mayor stood up immediately, signaling his aides to clear a path. He couldn't be seen in a room where police might be called. The hospital board members followed. The bankers followed. It was a mass exodus. The sound of 300 chairs scraping back, of footsteps hurrying toward the doors, filled the room. It was the sound of a dynasty ending. Celeste saw them leaving. Panic overrode her shame. She ran to the edge of the stage, her arms outstretched, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. No, please, wait, she cried out. Mr. Henderson Mayor, please, don't go. It is just a misunderstanding. We are a family. We are having a difficult moment. You know how it is. Every family has issues. She looked at Mrs. Calloway, pleading with her eyes. Martha, please, stay for the dessert. We have the truffles you like. It was pathetic. It was the desperation of a woman trying to stop a tidal wave with a paper napkin. Mrs. Calloway paused for a second. She looked at Celeste. For a moment, I thought she might pity her. But then, the echo of the recording seemed to play again in her mind, cleaning up the crumbs. Mrs. Calloway shook her head slowly. This isn't a family issue. Celeste, she said, her voice cutting through the noise. This is a character issue. You tried to humiliate your daughter for sport, and now we see the bill was due. She turned and walked away. Celeste collapsed to her knees on the stage, weeping into the hem of her gown, but nobody rushed to comfort her. The friends she had cultivated for 30 years, the people she had impressed with her galas and her name-dropping, they stepped over the debris of her reputation without looking back. Graham was still fighting. He was a captain who refused to believe the ship was sinking even as the water reached his neck. He saw the guests leaving and his denial turned into aggression. He turned to the stage manager, a young woman who was standing near the wings, looking terrified. You, Graham shouted, pointing a shaking finger. Fix this. Turn the music back on. I am Graham Ward. I own this town. If you don't turn that music on right now, I will have your job. I will have you blacklisted. Do you hear me? He grabbed the microphone stand, leaning into it, screaming at the staff. "Get the hell back to work. Serve the champagne. Lock the doors if you have to. Nobody leaves until I say the night is over." The microphone was still on. Every scream, every threat, every ounce of his tyrannical nature was broadcast to the departing crowd. They heard him threatening the staff. They heard him demanding the doors be locked, a massive fire safety violation, and a sign of pure, unhinged narcissism. Any lingering sympathy anyone might have had for the confused old man vanished. He wasn't a victim of a clerical error. He was a bully. He was exactly the man who would laugh about his daughter eating crumbs. The venue manager, a woman named Sarah, who I had spoken to only via email through my lawyer, stepped out from the back. She walked up the stairs, signaled to the sound booth, and then took the microphone directly out of Graham's hand. She didn't ask. She just took it. Graham was too stunned to resist. Sarah looked at the crowd, or what was left of it. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice calm and professional. "The event is officially concluded. The venue is closing. Please exit calmly. We apologize for the inconvenience and the behavior of the former clients." Former clients. She placed the microphone on the podium and walked away, signaling Billings to escort the family out. The guests were almost gone now, but the few stragglers who remained were doing something that sealed the coffin. They had their phones out. I watched on my screen as flashes went off. People were recording Blake struggling with security. They were recording Celeste weeping on the floor. They were recording Graham screaming at the empty air. Tomorrow, this wouldn't just be gossip, it would be viral content. The Ward winter meltdown would be trending before midnight. They wanted to control the narrative. Well, the narrative was now in the hands of the internet. But then, amidst the chaos, I saw something on the screen that made me sit up straight. Near the exit, a small group of people had stopped. It was the VIP table, the investors from the city. The serious money Blake had been so desperate to impress. One of them, a woman in a silver dress who I recognized as the CEO of a major logistics firm, was holding the card from the red box. Blake must have dropped it when he attacked Marcus. She was reading it. "From Nora," the woman said to her husband. "Evergrove Atelier." Her husband frowned. "Evergrove. Wait, is that the firm that did the installation for the convention center last month? The Hanging Gardens?" "Yes," the woman said, looking at the card with a new expression. It wasn't disgust. It was respect. "I tried to hire them for our corporate retreat. They were booked solid for 6 months. Their waiting list is impossible to get on." "Wait," another man in the group chimed in. "You mean the daughter, the one they said was playing in the dirt? She owns Evergrove?" "She doesn't just own it," the woman said, tapping the card against her palm. "She is it. That company is a gold mine. Their designs are genius." The realization rippled through the small group. "So?" the husband said slowly, looking back at the stage where Blake was currently being handcuffed for trying to bite a guard. "The son is an unemployed liability with an assault charge. The father is bankrupt, and the daughter they mocked is running the most successful design firm in the city." The woman in the silver dress laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. "Talk about betting on the wrong horse. I think I need to get Nora Ward's direct number. If she can orchestrate an event takedown this precise, imagine what she can do for a product launch." They walked out the door, shaking their heads, not in pity for me, but in bewilderment at the stupidity of my parents. I sat back in my seat. A smile, genuine and warm, finally touched my lips. I hadn't just exposed them, I had inverted them. I had taken their narrative that I was the failure and they were the success, and I had flipped it so completely that the truth was undeniable. I looked through the windshield of my truck. The doors of the conservatory swung open. A river of black coats and fur wraps poured out into the cold night air. The valet stand was overwhelmed. People were shivering, calling Ubers, eager to get away from the blast radius of the Ward family implosion. I watched them come. They looked different than they had arriving. They looked sobered. They looked like people who had just seen a car crash and were grateful to be alive. And then, I saw them. The doors opened again, and security escorted my family out. Graham was first, walking stiffly, clutching the eviction notice like it was a shield. He looked 10 years older than he had an hour ago. His posture was gone. He looked shrunken. Celeste followed, supported by a female security guard. She wasn't looking at anything. Her eyes were glazed over. She was clutching her shawl around her shoulders, shivering violently, not from the cold, but from the shock of total social exile. And finally, Blake. He wasn't in cuffs. Billings must have let him go with a warning once they were outside, but he looked defeated. His tie was crooked. His hair was messed up. He was walking with his head down, scuffing his expensive shoes on the pavement. They stood on the curb, waiting for their car. Nobody spoke to them. The guests who were waiting for their own cars turned their backs, creating a physical wall of silence between the wards and society. My family stood alone in the cold, under the harsh streetlights, surrounded by the people they had tried to impress, and they were completely, utterly invisible. I reached for the ignition. My hand was steady. "Merry Christmas," I whispered again. The gift had been delivered. The box had been opened, and the party was definitely over. I opened the door of my truck and stepped out into the freezing night air. The wind was biting, cutting through my jacket, but I did not feel the cold. My blood was running hot, fueled by a strange, calm adrenaline that felt less like fight or flight and more like the steady hum of a machine operating at peak efficiency. The valet stand was a scene of organized chaos, a swarm of red taillights and shivering guests. But my family stood apart from the herd. They were huddled near a decorative planter, isolated in a bubble of their own disgrace. The guests who were waiting for their cars gave them a wide berth, treating them with the same studious avoidance one gives to a car accident on the highway. You look, but you do not stop. Celeste was the first to see me. She had been scanning the parking lot, her eyes darting frantically back and forth, perhaps looking for a friendly face, or perhaps looking for a ride since their driver was nowhere to be seen. Her gaze swept over the rows of luxury sedans and landed on my battered Ford pickup truck parked under the halogen street lamp. Then she saw me leaning against the hood. She froze. It was a physical arrest of motion, as if someone had cut her strings. For a moment, she just stared. In her eyes, I saw a flicker of genuine confusion, as if she were trying to reconcile the image of the daughter she thought she knew, the quiet, muddy, obedient girl with the woman standing before her, watching her ruin with a cup of coffee in hand. "Nora," she breathed. The wind carried her voice to me, thin and brittle. She took a step toward me, then another. It wasn't a run. It was a stumble. She moved like a sleepwalker waking up in a nightmare. Graham followed her gaze. When he saw me, his posture changed instantly. The defeated, shrunken old man vanished, replaced by the tyrant who had ruled my childhood with terrifying unpredictability. He straightened his spine, adjusted his coat, and marched toward me. Blake trailed behind them, kicking at the pavement, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, looking like a sullen teenager despite his $3,000 tuxedo. They stopped 5 feet away from me. The distance felt like a canyon. "You," Graham said. His voice was low, a growl that vibrated in his chest. "You are here." "I am here," I said. My voice was steady. It did not shake. It did not rise. It was the voice I used when I was negotiating with a difficult supplier. The voice of someone who held all the leverage. "You did this," Graham accused. He gestured vaguely at the conservatory behind him, at the dark windows and the fleeing guests. "You set this up. You sent that box. You humiliated us." "I did not humiliate you, Graham," I replied, looking him dead in the eye. "I simply provided the audio equipment. You provided the content. You humiliated yourselves. I just made sure the acoustics were better." "How dare you?" Celeste hissed. She had found her voice now, and it was trembling with that familiar mix of victimhood and rage. "It is Christmas Eve, Nora. We are your family. We gave you life. And you repay us by destroying our reputation in front of the entire city for what? A little attention. Attention. I laughed. A short, dry sound. Mother, 12 hours ago, I stood in that ballroom and listened to you plan exactly how to destroy my reputation. I heard you script the lines. I heard you decide the lighting cues. You were going to put my face on a 20-foot screen and mock me while I wasn't even there to defend myself. You wanted a show. I just gave you a different ending. Blake stepped forward then, pushing past Celeste. His face was flushed, his eyes glassy. You are just jealous, he spat. That is what this is. You have always been jealous of me. You are jealous that Dad trusts me with the business. You are jealous that Mom actually likes me. You are pathetic. Nora, you think ruining one party makes you special? You are still just the gardener. I looked at my brother. I looked at the spite in his eyes, the weakness in his chin. For years, his insults had landed like blows. Tonight, they felt like rain bouncing off a window. I am not jealous of you, Blake, I said softly. I pity you. You are 30 years old, and you have never earned a single dollar that wasn't handed to you. You have never built anything. You have never fixed anything. You are a parasite in a tuxedo. Shut up, Blake lunged, making a move as if to grab me. I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. I just looked at him, and in that look, he saw something he hadn't expected. He saw that I wasn't afraid. Graham caught Blake's arm and yanked him back, not to protect me, but to regain control. Enough, Graham barked. He turned his glare back to me. This is not a game. Nora, do you have any idea what you have done? The investors, the contracts. You have cost this family millions of dollars tonight. I will sue you. I will sue you for every penny you have. I will take your little flower shop and burn it to the ground. You can try, I said, but I think your lawyer will advise against it. Truth is an absolute defense against defamation. Graham, and I have the recordings. All of them. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I tapped the screen. The voice of Graham Ward filled the cold space between us. Tinny but unmistakable. It signals to the board that we have cut ties with the unpromising assets. It shows we are focused on strength. I tapped the screen again. Blake's voice followed. Everyone needs to know their position. Some are at the head of the table. Some are under it, cleaning up the crumbs. I held the phone up, letting the words hang in the freezing air like smoke. That is what you think of me, I said, putting the phone away. That is what you discuss when you think I am not listening. You don't see a daughter. You see an asset to be liquidated or a liability to be managed. You wanted me to know my position. Well, tonight, I decided to redefine it. Celeste's face crumpled. The anger drained out of her, replaced by a desperate, frantic realization of the stakes. She saw the guests driving away. She saw the social fabric of her life unraveling, and instinctively, she reached for the only weapon she had left. She started to cry. It wasn't the polite, dab the eyes crying she did at funerals. It was messy, loud sobbing. She reached out, trying to grab my hand. Nora, please, she wailed. We are sorry. Okay, we are sorry. It was a joke. It was just a bad joke. We didn't mean it. You are my daughter, my baby girl. Please, don't do this. Let's go to the car. Let's go home and talk about this. Just the four of us. We can fix this. We can put out a statement saying it was a prank, a misunderstanding. She looked at me with pleading eyes, the mascara running down her cheeks. We need you. Nora, she whispered. We need you to help us fix this. I looked at her hand reaching for mine. A year ago, I would have taken it. A year ago. I would have done anything for that sliver of validation. I would have issued the statement. I would have taken the blame. I would have cleaned up their mess just to hear her say she loved me. But tonight, looking at her, I felt nothing. The cord had been cut. You need me to help you fix it, I repeated slowly. That is the only time you remember I am your daughter, isn't it? When something is broken, when the debt collectors call, when the PR goes wrong, you don't want a daughter. Celeste, you want a janitor. I stepped back, out of her reach. I am done cleaning up your crumbs, I said. Graham stared at me. His face was pale, his eyes narrowing as he processed the situation. He was a businessman, bad at it perhaps, but he understood power dynamics, and he realized suddenly that the dynamic had shifted in a way he couldn't explain. Who is backing you? Graham asked abruptly. His voice was sharp, suspicious. You couldn't pull this off alone. The legal notice, the security, the shutdown, that takes influence. That takes capital. Who are you working for? Is it Henderson? Did he put you up to this to tank the stock? I almost laughed. Even now, facing the wreckage, he couldn't conceive that I was capable of this on my own. He had to believe there was a man behind the curtain, someone powerful, someone like him. Nobody put me up to this, Graham, I said. Don't lie to me, he shouted, losing his composure again. You are a landscaper. You don't have the authority to shut down the Hawthorne Conservatory. You don't have the power to evict me. Who signed the termination order? Who is Ironwood Holdings? I looked at him. I looked at the three of them, my father, my mother, my brother. They were shivering in the cold, waiting for me to tell them the name of the monster that had eaten their Christmas. I am Ironwood Holdings, I said. The silence that followed was heavier than the one in the ballroom. Blake blinked. What? I bought the debt 8 months ago, I said, my voice calm, factual. I own the master lease on the conservatory. I own the venue. I own the contract you signed. And I own the $25,000 outstanding balance you failed to pay. Graham's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked like he had been punched in the gut. He staggered back slightly, bracing himself against a lamppost. You, he whispered, you own the building. I own the paper, I corrected. And because I own the paper, I get to decide who walks through those doors. And I decided that a family who doesn't pay their bills and insults their landlord doesn't get to party tonight. Celeste stared at me with horror. It wasn't the horror of betrayal. It was the horror of realization. She was realizing that for 8 months, she had been treating the owner of the venue like a servant. She was realizing that every time she snapped at me to use the service entrance, I was the one allowing her to walk through the front door. But how? Blake stammered. You sell plants. I run a business, Blake, I said coldly. A successful one, unlike you. I reinvest my profits. I diversify. I build equity. While you were buying watches, I was buying assets. I saw the shift in their eyes. It was profound. For 30 years, they had looked at me down the length of their noses. They had looked at me as the disappointment, the failure, the charity case. Now, for the first time in their lives, they were looking at me and seeing a predator. They were looking at me and seeing someone who had more power than they did. It was a terrifying look. It was a look of fear. And strangely, I didn't feel a rush of triumph. I didn't feel the urge to dance on their grave. I just felt light, the heavy, crushing weight of their expectation. The burden of trying to please them simply evaporated. I didn't care if they respected me. I didn't care if they feared me. I just realized I no longer needed them. So, Graham said, his voice shaking, trying to find a footing on this new, unstable ground. So you evicted your own family. To teach us a lesson is that it, fine, you made your point. Now unlock the doors. We can salvage the after-party. The event is over, Graham, I said. The staff has gone home. Then what do we do? Celeste cried, looking at the dark building. We have debts. We have investors who are going to pull out. If this gets out, Nora, you are bankrupting us. I am not bankrupting you, I said. You were bankrupt a long time ago. I just turned on the lights so you could see the empty vault. I reached into my pocket one last time. I pulled out a small, crisp white card. It had gold lettering. I held it out to Graham. This is Grant Hollander's card, I said. He is my attorney. He handles all affairs regarding Ironwood Holdings and Evergrove Atelier. Graham stared at the card. He didn't take it. I tucked it into the breast pocket of his coat. right next to the silk handkerchief he used to wipe away his problems. "If you want to discuss a payment plan for the arrears," I said, stepping back toward my truck. "Call him on Tuesday. Monday is a holiday." "Nora!" Celeste screamed, lunging forward again. "You can't leave us here. You can't just walk away. We are family." I opened the door of my truck. I climbed into the cab, the familiar smell of old coffee and work boots welcoming me back. I looked down at them one last time. They looked small. They looked cold. They looked like strangers. "No, Mother," I said, looking her in the eye as I grabbed the door handle. "We are not family. Tonight, we are just opposing counsel." I slammed the door. The sound was solid, final. I turned the key. The engine roared to life, drowning out whatever Blake was screaming at my window. I put the truck in gear and pulled out of the parking space, leaving the Ward family standing alone in the center of their own wreckage. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't need to. I knew exactly where they were. They were in the past, and I was driving straight into the future. I had the truck in gear. I had the engine running. I could have driven away right then, leaving them in the rearview mirror like roadkill on the highway of my past. But as I lifted my foot off the brake, I saw Billings, the head of security, wave a hand at me. He was standing between my truck and my family, a wall of black tactical nylon. He signaled for me to wait. I sighed, the sound heavy in the small cab. I rolled down the window. The freezing air rushed in again, carrying the scent of pine needles and the acrid smell of desperation. "One moment, Ms. Ward," Billings said, his voice deep and respectful. "We need a final signature on the eviction protocol to confirm the premises have been vacated by the defaulting party." He wasn't asking me to sign. He was asking them to sign, and he wanted me, the owner, to witness it. It was a final procedural nail in the coffin. I leaned my arm on the doorframe, looking down at the spectacle. Graham was currently trying to shove a checkbook into Billings's chest. My father looked manic. His hair, usually lacquered into a silver helmet of authority, was windblown and wild. He was scribbling furiously with a gold fountain pen, the nib tearing the paper. "Here," Graham shouted, ripping the check out. $25,000, plus a $5,000 inconvenience fee. "Take it. Take the damn money and turn the lights back on." He thrust the slip of paper at Billings. Billings didn't even lift his hands to take it. He looked at the check fluttering in the wind. Then he looked at Graham with the pitying expression one might give a confused child. "Mr. Ward," Billings said calmly, "the box office is closed. The staff has clocked out. And frankly, sir, your guests are gone." Graham froze. He turned around slowly. He looked at the long, winding driveway of the Hawthorne Conservatory. 10 minutes ago, it had been a traffic jam of luxury cars. Now, it was a ghost town. The last few taillights were disappearing around the bend at the bottom of the hill. The limousines were gone. The taxis were gone. The donors, the investors, the politicians, they had all vanished. They had fled the scene of the social crime to avoid being called as witnesses. There was no one left to impress. There was no one left to save face for. The check in Graham's hand went limp. "They left," Graham whispered. He sounded hollowed out. "All of them." "Even the mayor, sir," Billings confirmed. "Especially the mayor." That was the spark that finally ignited the powder keg of resentment that had been sitting next to my family all night. And the explosion didn't come from me. It came from Blake, my brother, the golden heir, the one who had mocked me for playing in the dirt, suddenly turned on our father. "You said you handled it," Blake screamed, his voice cracking. He threw his hands up, looking at the empty driveway. "You told me the accounts were flush. You told me the rent was covered. I stood up there and gave a speech about success because you told me we were successful." Graham looked at his son, stunned by the betrayal. "Blake, I moved some assets. It was a timing issue." "It wasn't a timing issue," Blake yelled, getting right in his father's face. "It is always a lie. You have been lying to everyone for years, and now look. I am the laughing stock of the city." My friends were recording me. Dad. They were recording me being dragged out by a bouncer. "Lower your voice," Graham hissed, glancing at me. "Do not do this in front of her." "Why not?" Blake laughed. A shrill, hysterical sound. "She already knows. She is the one who evicted us. She is the only one who actually has any money. God, this is pathetic. You are pathetic." Blake turned away from them, pacing in a tight circle, running his hands through his hair. "I am done. I am not going down with this ship. I am telling the press I didn't know. I am telling them I was a victim of your mismanagement." Celeste let out a gasp of pure horror. "Blake, you wouldn't. We are a united front." "There is no front, Mom," Blake shouted back. "There is just a pile of debt and a bunch of lies. We only looked united because we were all standing on Nora's neck. Well, she stood up, and we fell down. That is what happened." I watched them from the truck window. It was a revelation. For years, I had thought their bond was unbreakable. I thought they were a fortress of mutual admiration. But Blake was right. They weren't bonded by love. They were bonded by a shared target. As long as they had me to look down on, they could ignore the cracks in their own foundation. Without me to serve as the designated failure, they turned on each other instantly. Celeste, seeing her son defect and her husband collapse, turned her desperation toward me. She rushed to the side of the truck, gripping the side mirror with white-knuckled hands. "Nora," she pleaded, her voice shaking. "Nora, look at this. Look at what is happening. Your brother is hysterical. Your father is in shock. Is this what you wanted? It is Christmas Eve. For God's sake. How can you be so cruel on Christmas?" She looked up at me, her eyes brimming with tears that, for once, might have been real tears of fear. "We are family," she sobbed. "Christmas is about forgiveness. It is about mercy. Can't you just stop this call the lawyer undo it?" I looked at my mother. I looked at the woman who had planned to project a photo of my muddy face on a 20-foot screen to make her guests laugh. I looked at the woman who had told me to use the service entrance so I wouldn't spoil her aesthetic. "You are right, Mother," I said softly. Hope flared in her eyes. Christmas is a time when people are kind," I said. My voice was gentle, but it had the finality of a closing door. "I am being kind. I am teaching you the truth. That is the kindest thing anyone has ever done for you." "That is not kindness," she cried. "That is revenge." "I just did my part," I said, cutting her off. "I delivered the centerpiece. I delivered the truth. And now, I am delivering myself away from you." Billings stepped forward, breaking the moment. He held a clipboard out to Graham. "Mr. Ward," Billings said, his tone brooking no argument, "I need you to sign the notice of vacancy. It acknowledges that you have removed all personal property and that the venue has been returned to the possession of the owner. Ironwood Holdings." Graham looked at the clipboard. He looked at me. "I have to sign this," he asked weakly. "To you." "To the owner," I said. "That happens to be me." Graham took the clipboard. His hand was shaking so bad the plastic backing rattled against the metal clip. I watched him. I watched the man who used to terrify me with a single raised eyebrow. I watched the man who had commanded boardrooms and lectured me on strength. He couldn't even hold the pen steady. He scratched a jagged, unrecognizable scrawl on the line. He handed the clipboard back to Billings. He looked defeated. He looked old. For the first time in my life, I didn't see a giant. I saw a small, sad man in a rented tuxedo. Billings checked the signature. "Thank you. You are now required to leave the property immediately. Any return will be considered criminal trespass." I reached for the gear shift again. It was truly over. But before I could release the parking brake, a figure emerged from the shadows near the valet stand. It was a man. He was tall, wearing a cashmere coat over a tuxedo that cost more than my truck. He wasn't rushing. He was walking with a calm, deliberate stride. I recognized him instantly. It was Elias Thorne. He was one of the angel investors Blake had been drooling over for months. He was a venture capitalist who controlled half the tech startups in the state. He was the kind of man who didn't just attend parties. He decided if the party mattered. He walked right past Graham. He didn't even glance at Celeste. He walked past Blake, who was still muttering to himself. He walked straight to my truck window. Celeste gasped. She obviously thought he was coming to scold me, to defend the honor of the Ward family. She straightened up, ready to witness my dressing down. Mr. Thorne stopped 2 feet from my door. He looked at me. He had piercing gray eyes that assessed value in seconds. "You are Nora Ward?" he asked. His voice was gravel and silk. "I am," I said, meeting his gaze. "I own the Helios Group," he said. "We have a launch event coming up in February. Global media, 3,000 attendees. We were going to go with a firm in New York." He paused. He glanced back at the dark, empty conservatory, then back at me. "I like how you handle logistics," he said. A small, dry smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Brutal, efficient, high impact, and the setup inside the red velvet box, the timing, that was theatrical genius. You controlled the entire room without saying a word." I didn't smile. I didn't blush. I stayed in my professional persona. "I deliver what is required," I said. "Whether it is a landscape or a lesson." "I want Evergrove for the Helios launch," Thorne said. He reached into his coat and pulled out a titanium business card. He handed it to me through the window. "Call my office on Tuesday. Name your retainer. I don't care what it is. I want that level of precision on my team." I took the card. "I will check my schedule. Mr. Thorne, but I believe we can accommodate you." "Good," he said. He nodded to me, a respectful nod, an equal's nod. Then he turned and walked away toward his waiting town car. My family stood frozen in the wake of the interaction. Celeste was staring at me with her mouth open. She looked at the titanium card in my hand. She looked at the man who had just offered me a blank check. For 30 years. She had told me I was nothing. She had told me I needed the Ward name to survive. She had told me that without her guidance, I was just a girl playing in the dirt. And now, she watched the most powerful man in the city ignore her completely to do business with me. In her eyes, I saw the final shattering of her worldview. It wasn't just that I had money, it was that I had respect. And I had earned it without them. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their connections. I didn't need their permission to exist. "Nora," Celeste whispered. It was a small, frightened sound. I looked at her one last time. "Goodbye, Mother," I said. I didn't say it with anger. I didn't say it with hate. I said it with the indifference of a stranger. I put the truck in drive. I eased off the brake. The tires crunched over the cold pavement. I rolled up the window, sealing out the cold, sealing out the sobbing of my mother and the shouting of my brother. As I pulled out of the lot and onto the main road, my phone buzzed in the cup holder. I glanced down. It was a text from Jenna at the shop. "New inquiry just came in via the website. It is the City Council. They want to know if Evergrove is available to design the Centennial Plaza project. They said they saw the live stream." I smiled. I looked in the rearview mirror. The Hawthorne Conservatory was receding into the distance, a dark box on a dark hill. The Ward family was just a cluster of small shadows standing under a lonely street lamp, getting smaller and smaller with every mile I put between us. I thought about the slide they had planned to show, the one with me in the mud. They were right about one thing. I did like playing in the dirt. Because dirt is honest. You plant something, you nurture it, and it grows. You can't lie to a garden, and you can't fake a harvest. I took a deep breath. The air in the truck tasted sweet. It tasted like freedom. I didn't ruin their Christmas. I just stopped being an ornament for their ego. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving the winter, I was owning it. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It was a wild ride from the frozen parking lot to the final signature, and I hope you enjoyed seeing Nora take back her power. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Are you listening from your car, your kitchen, or maybe your own workshop? Let me know in the comments below. I love reading your stories. If you enjoyed this revenge drama, Please make sure to subscribe to the channel Maya Revenge Stories. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next one.